When GMOs were first introduced, when it was first discovered that we could transfer genes between species, scientists met in a meeting in California and decided to govern themselves, to regulate themselves, and not allow these genes to be escaped into the environment, because it was such a new and radical concept that we were creating organisms that were not part of the billions of years of evolution, but creating organisms overnight. It didn't follow the normal segregating laws to keep certain genes in some species and certain others. But soon after, some companies like Monsanto decided not only to release them, but to put them into the food supply. And so this technology actually has an unprecedented exposure. It can influence everyone who eats, every organism, and all future generations, because it changes the ecosystem both in the environment and inside our bodies. When we think about such an amazing deployment of GMOs, we would hope that those who are in charge of their regulation hesitated and delayed the approval until all of the concerns were dealt with, until there was an overwhelming consensus of safety and protection, because it's an irreversible deployment. You cannot go and recall the genetically modified contamination of the indigenous corn varieties in Mexico, discovered at first by Berkeley professor Ignacio Chapela. You cannot recall genetically modified salmon if it escapes into the ocean, or genetically modified mosquitoes who are released in the Cayman Islands in Malaysia. Once released, it's irreversible. So we're going to talk about what level of caution and regulation has been used in preparation of introducing these products. And the products include the four main ones: soy, corn, cotton, and canola, as well as sugar beets, which produces the most sugar in the United States, as well as zucchini, crookneck squash, Hawaiian pine, and most recently alfalfa, which is used as hay for animals. When we look at why GMOs came to the marketplace in the 1990s, it was based on this one sentence by the FDA. It basically says, we're not aware of any information showing that GMOs are significantly different. Therefore, no safety studies whatsoever are required. No labeling is required. Companies like Monsanto, who told us that their PCBs, Agent Orange, and DDT were safe, can determine if their own GMOs are safe, put them on the market without labeling, and without even telling the FDA. So this was basically a complete open door on the basis of the concept that they had looked all over for some significant difference and found none. Therefore, they wouldn't treat GMOs differently than other crops. This was the May 1992 policy, and it still is in force today. And it's a lie. It's a complete fiction. It's been proven to be a fiction. The entire introduction of genetically modified foods is based on deception. Thousands of internal documents at the FDA became public from a lawsuit in 1998. And these documents revealed that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the agency was not that GMOs were not different, but that GMOs were significantly different and dangerous. That they could lead to allergies, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. They urged their superiors to require long-term study. But they were ignored, and their warnings were denied. Why did that take place? Now remember, they were warning about a new infant technology that would be fed to everyone in the country, and perhaps everyone on Earth. And the genes would cross-pollinate to other crops and through the generations to everyone. And they had concerns and were ignored. Why was that? The White House had been convinced by the biotech industry that GMOs were the key to increasing U.S. exports and U.S. domination of world food trade. So they instructed the FDA to promote biotechnology. The FDA then created a new position specifically for one person, Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney. While he was in charge, this policy came to pass. He then worked at the USDA on biotech issues and then became Monsanto's vice president. He was put into a new position by the Obama administration. He's the U.S. food safety czar. The person who I believe is responsible for more food-related illnesses and deaths than anyone in history is in charge of U.S. food safety. Now, the scientists at the FDA were concerned about GMOs, but they didn't have any data to back up their concerns. Now, there has been data collected. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine decided to look at that data. This organization looks at new disease outbreaks, new toxins in the environment, and puts them together. They were the first organization to identify Gulf War syndrome, food allergies, chemical sensitivity, and about 18 different discoveries that have since become accepted. And after looking at the documented health risks of genetically engineered foods, of the animal feeding studies in particular, they declared that the relationship between disorders in the laboratory animals and the GM feed was not casual, but causal. They said that GMOs were linked to reproductive problems, immune system problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, gastrointestinal problems, and other disorders, and asked all doctors to prescribe non-GMO diets to every patient. We have spoken to many doctors that prescribe non-GMO diets, and they are very excited about the improvements they're seeing in a wide variety of ailments. We'll talk more about those after we've had a chance to look at the data ourselves to draw our own conclusions. Now, the first GM crop that was evaluated in the voluntary consultation process at the FDA was the Flavor Saver tomato, designed for longer shelf life. This was the only company that gave raw feeding study data to the FDA for evaluation. They did a rat study, and the rats refused to eat the tomatoes. It's not a unique experience. Farmers all over the world say that many animals, when given a choice, avoid GMOs. Cows, pigs, elk, deer, squirrels, raccoons, mice, rats, geese, buffalo, and chickens. So it's our job to get humans up to the level of animals. In my book, Seeds of Deception, before every single chapter, I have a little one-pager called Wisdom of the Animals, where I describe the eyewitness reports. And there's a description of how squirrels in Iowa, in the coldest part of the winter, refused to eat the corn cob that was genetically engineered, but kept eating the non-GM corn, until the farmer didn't put out any non-GM corn anymore, and the squirrels just stayed away for 10 days from the GM corn and finally nibbled a few kernels. That's all they could handle. Someone else decided to repeat the experiment in Illinois, bought a bag of corn on the cob that was genetically engineered, and corn on the cob that was not, put it in the workroom and forgot about it. So long after the winter, they discovered the bag and found that the mice had done the study for them. They had devoured the non-genetically modified corn and left the GM corn untouched. Getting back to the tomatoes, they force-fed the rats the tomatoes, and 7 of 20 developed stomach lesions, 7 of 40 died within 2 weeks. Now, in the UK, they wanted to convince the skeptical public that GMOs were safe, and so they gave a $3 million grant to this man, Dr. Arpad Pusztai, to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs. He was the world's leading researcher in his field, and he worked with